Up to now, we've discussed file permissions with the default read, write, execute permission. And we know that there are 3 entities on the system, and each one of them can have read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute. Well, there are actually 3 other permissions, special permissions, that can be applied to the files and folders. The first one is called the set user ID, or the second one is called the set group ID, and finally there's sticky. And they are actually, I've put them in these places because they are applied based on each of these entities. So the first one makes sense. If you wanted to add this, you would smod u plus s, because the s represents the set user. For a group, it would be g plus s if you wanted to add the set group bit to the group. And for the sticky, it's o plus t. T represents the sticky bit. And they are important and used quite often in the file system. I'll give you a little explanation, then we'll go and take a look at them. The set user bit basically says to the system, wherever it is set, run that on a binary. So if it's on a binary or a script, when that S bit is set on that file in the permissions, run the file, or the application in this case, with the permission of the user owner. Typically, this is run against a root file owned by root. So I'll show you examples of that. So root owns the file. I, as student, need to run it to gain access to do something. Change passwords is the most common one. To do that, I need root access, and so the set user ID bit allows me to do that. Once again, I'll show that to you. The set group ID does the same thing. We typically don't use it for that anymore. What this does, and what we use it for in the system, is to change the ownership of a file when it's saved to a particular folder. So if I have the /sales folder, which we'll be looking at, and Joe saves a file to the /sales folder, well, I want it to be, the ownership to be switched over to the sales group and not be left as the group owner is Joe. And the S group ID bit will do that for me. The sticky bit basically says, when set on a folder, only the user owner of the file. So for instance, if Joe saves it to the sales folder, it becomes owned by the sales group. But if I have the sticky bit set to the sales folder, only Joe, the user Joe, will be able to delete that file. So wherever the sticky bit is set on the folder, only the user owner can delete the file. The group owner, if it's different, and in this case it will be, cannot delete the file. All right, this is probably easier to see actually done than it is to talk about in theory. So let's go to the command line and play around with it. So the first one we'll look at is the set user ID bit. And when that's set on a binary file, it means run this file with the privileges and permissions of the user owner. And a very good example of that is it's set on the password utility. So if we take a look at the file that we can use, first of all, if you go right over here to where the user permissions are, you'll notice that there's an S where the X typically is. Now, the X is still there. There's only 3 positions, but there are actually 4 permissions that can be in those places. So the S, when set, will basically share the space with the X. And I know that it's there, the X is there, because the S is lowercase, and we'll see that when we play around with the sticky. If the X wasn't there, the S would be uppercase. But that is saying run this file as the user owner, and this is the user owner right here, root. So we get to run it as root. And this is the file that we edit. We looked at this file when we did users. This is the file we edit when we change our password. Now look at the permissions on that. There's no way that student should be able to edit that file. But student can, because when we evoke the password utility, we're actually running it with the privileges of root for a short period of time. So I'll come over here, and I won't actually change the password, but you can see it allow me to do it. I'll give you an example. If I try to run part ed, which is the partition utility, If I try to run that as student and press enter, it's basically going to come back and say, you can't do this. So it's not going to allow me to do it. I'll say retry because I don't have the privilege to run this utility. If I did that as root, come back over here, right, I see a very different, pops me right back in. Well, what happens, I'll quit out of this. What happens as root, I smod, well, first I got to find where it is. There it is, all right. What happens if I smod that file with the S bit set to the user like this? U plus S bin part ed. By doing that, I'm basically saying anybody who can get to that utility when they run it will run it as root. I'll go over here now and we'll see, remember how we failed, so I'll say cancel, up arrow, come back in here, press enter. Look what happened this time. Instead of failing, it dropped me in. It gives me a little, you're not the super user. How the heck did you get in here? But it's going to allow me to do it. So that shows you the power of setting that S bit on the user file. Next one we'll look at is the G bit, and the G bit is so that permissions are changed, or ownership is changed when the file is saved to a directory. So I'll get out of this, quit, and I'm going to SU into Joe, and I'll ID Joe, and as you can see, Joe is a member of the sales group. Well, when Joe has a right to save to the file. First, I have to change the ownership of the sales, so we'll look at sales. Well, the first thing I want to do is change the ownership of this to the sales group, so I'll chown. Now remember, we can use the change group one also. I'll put a colon, and I'll say sales/sales. And I'll up arrow, and we can see now that it's a member of sales owns this directory. And Joe is a member of sales. So Joe now has the same rights and privileges as everybody else. And so we're going to change the permissions on here too. And I'll use smod 070/sales. So what I've done is taken all permissions away from the user, all permissions away from everybody else, and given all permissions to sales. So that means anybody who's a member of sales, they're in. They can get in this directory. So Joe can do that. So he'll CD into sales now. And he'll touch a file. And I'll LL. The problem with this is that this is the problem. It saves, it's in the sales group or the sales folder where the sales group's in charge of it, but Joe, the group, is still owner of that file. I want anything that's saved in the sales folder owned by the sales group should immediately be changed over to the sales group as ownership. This way we can share. That's the whole point of this directory, is to share files between the users. To do that, what I have to do is set the group bit to this directory. So we will do that. I'll say smod G plus S/sales. LLD/sales. And once again, here it was just a second ago, there's the X. Now you see there's an S. That means, remember, it's lowercase. That means there's both an S and an X in that spot. Now watch what happens when Joe touches another file over here. So up arrow, I'll say Joe file 2. Look what happened. Anybody who's a member of the sales group who saves in this folder where the set group bit is set will automatically have the ownership switched over to the sales group, which is a good thing because we want them to be able to collaborate. But what I don't want them to be able to do is delete other people's files. Because remember, with that W on the sales folder, anybody who's a member of sales can delete anything in there unless we add the sticky bit. So if I add the sticky bit to here, and I'll up arrow, and that goes in the others position. Oops, that's a 0. T, press enter, come back over. Well, we'll look at it first because we want to see what it looks like. Ah, there you go. There's one of those capitals that I was telling you about. Because there is no X set here, the system says, okay, there's no X, so that means it's a capital T is going there. That will stop anybody from deleting Joe's file. So even if other members of sales were in here and they wanted to delete that file, they couldn't delete it because only the user owner, Joe, will be able to delete that file. That's what the sticky bit does for us. So this is a pretty common setup right here for a sales or HR or admin type directory where multiple users will be going in there. They should be able to share information. Nobody else should be able to get into that who do not belong in that group. So we don't want people going into the benefits folder and looking around, or the payroll folder and looking around, who don't belong in there. But these permissions set like this will allow everybody who's a member of that group, in this case sales, to go in there, share files, but this will make sure that nobody can delete the other person's file. So that's the special bits and how we use them. Next, I'll show you real quick how to set this all up and get it going very fast. And we'll take a look at the UMask.